On today's episode, I'll react to the Taylor Hall trade while Frank Nazar and the kids continue to cook.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, Blackhawks fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, just a quick reminder to please go hit the like button and jump in the comment section down below as well. Subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube if you haven't done so already, as I'm now 14 subscribers away from the 2,000 plateau. Please make sure to go and hit that subscribe button, even if you're someone who regularly listens through an audio platform. Really does help me out tremendously, and would love to hit 2,000 subscribers before the end of January. Last but certainly not least, got to give a quick shout out as well to today's sponsor, which is FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is finally here. The Philadelphia Eagles looking to stop the Kansas City Chiefs from a three-peat for the first time in NFL history. To go and get in on the action, make sure to check out FanDuel.com, and if your first $5 bet wins, you'll win $200 worth of bonus bets with America's #1 sportsbook. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Again, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. Hope everyone had themselves a wonderful weekend. Very hectic weekend, not only for our Chicago Blackhawks, but quite honestly in the sports world as a whole, and for your boy as well. I had to help a buddy move on Saturday morning, and I'm sure most of you have noticed I haven't had an episode drop since Friday morning, aka prior to the bombshell trade that went down on Friday evening involving Taylor Hall, Mikko Rantanen, and Martin Necas. Unfortunately, wasn't able to get an episode out on Saturday morning, Blackhawks fans, because I was up bright and early helping one of my buddies move, and then Sunday episodes just never really get all that much traction, especially with it being the NFL's conference championship weekend. So had to wait until Monday to get my full reaction out on the Taylor Hall trade, but holy jumpin' Blackhawks fans, that was my first reaction when I saw this trade go down. And we got some rumblings, prior to the Blackhawks puck drop with the Tampa Bay Lightning. That also threw a little bit of a wrench into everything as well. As all of these trade details are being unveiled on social media, the Blackhawks are also in the middle of a game with the Tampa Bay Lightning. It is like, oh my gosh, I could not get it any busier at this point in time. We got wind that Taylor Hall might be on the move, as he was not on the ice for the Blackhawks warm-ups prior to puck drop against the Tampa Bay Lightning. So sure seemed like something could be transpiring. There, of course, had been some rumors involving Hall the last couple of weeks, as he was pretty open with the media, saying that he expected to be traded by the Blackhawks prior to the deadline. So we knew Hall was going to be on the move. We didn't exactly know where or when or what pieces were ultimately going to be involved. But then we got the bombshell. Mikko Rantanen, the Moose, was on the move from the Colorado Avalanche to the Carolina Hurricanes. Martin Necas, who has been involved in trade rumors for the last year or so. I've actually had a couple of different episodes talking about whether the Blackhawks should pursue Martin Necas, both of them dropping last summer in the offseason, because there were multiple hockey sources saying the Blackhawks could be a team kicking the tires with Carolina about Necas and what it would potentially cost to pry him away from them. Just seemed like there was never going to be a long-term plan in place for Necas in Carolina. Never seemed like he was the perfect team guy for what Rod Brind'Amour was necessarily preaching there. So ultimately, he winds up being the big name piece going back to the Colorado Avalanche, along with Jack Drury, a 2025 second-round pick, and a 2026 fourth-round pick from Carolina. The Hurricanes land Mikko Rantanen from the Colorado Avalanche and Taylor Hall from the Chicago Blackhawks. No salary retention, though, on Taylor Hall. Carolina has his full $6 million AAV on their books through the end of the season, while the Blackhawks only land a 2025 third-round selection, which, funny enough, was theirs originally, for taking on 50% of Mikko Rantanen's contract through the end of this season. And a lot of Blackhawks fans, as these details were being unveiled, and there wasn't really any news of the Blackhawks landing another pick or another prospect or a mid-tier player or anything other than this third round selection, there was a lot of frustration coming out of the Blackhawks fan base. And quite honestly, I was pretty frustrated at that point in time too, Blackhawks fans. And this is why I'm actually a little bit grateful to have not gone like live on Friday night or had an episode post early on Saturday morning, because knee-jerk reactions are just, in my opinion, never the way to go about things. And it's never been the way I like to produce my content, or like clickbaity. I like to let things settle and truly depict how I feel after things marinate for a little bit, because knee-jerk reactions never, I think you can get off to foolish assessments that way. And I think I would have given a foolish assessment on this trade had I have given my reaction on Friday night. But after kind of letting things settle for a couple of days here, I think this was a pretty good piece of business by general manager Kyle Davidson and the Chicago Blackhawks, but it certainly was not a sexy deal for them. And I understand the frustrations. This is where I really think the frustration stems from. It's seeing a player named Mikko Rantanen, who is a superstar in this league and could be a player the Blackhawks are going to try and pursue in the summer to help out this offense, as it seems like that's really the big thing they're missing, is another true top liner along with Connor Bedard. Mikko Rantanen, Mitch Marner are the two big name forward free agents set to hit the market this summer that you would think the Blackhawks would potentially make a run at. So to see a player like Mikko Rantanen, a superstar like Mikko Rantanen, be on the move from Colorado to Carolina, and then see a player like Martin Necas, who again, as I mentioned, the Blackhawks have kind of been involved in rumors with over the last year or so, a special player, to see him be on the move from Carolina to Colorado, while the Blackhawks and all of us fans are just kind of left twiddling our thumbs here with our own 2025 third round pick while all these other fun pieces are on the move. I think that's where a lot of the frustration stemmed from on Friday night. And I completely understand that, because as a team, it's been at the bottom of the standings for the last 3 years in a row and seemingly no progress being made in this rebuild. You would love to see general manager Kyle Davidson go hunting for a big fish like Rantanen or Necas to help change the tides of this rebuild. But I do think that would still be a short-sighted move for the Blackhawks right here, right now. And quite honestly, what do the Blackhawks have on their current roster aside from Connor Bedard, Frank Nazar, future puzzle pieces that Kyle Davidson is super high on? What do the Blackhawks have that's attractive enough to land a Mikko Rantanen or a Martin Necas? The answer is absolutely nothing. So while it is frustrating to see those type of players be on the move and we only wind up with a 2025 third round pick, it actually is a pretty good piece of business, Blackhawks fans, if you break it all down. So I mentioned the Blackhawks did not wind up retaining any money on Taylor Hall's $6 million AAV through the end of the season. They elected to retain half of Mikko Rantanen's contract through the end of this year. That contract obviously has more value than Taylor Hall's. Retaining half of Mikko Rantanen's, that's $4.625 million on the Blackhawks books now through the end of this year. And they absolutely would have had to retain half of Taylor Hall's $6 million AAV, get it down to, at the very least, $3 million in order to trade him. And even at that point in time, considering the type of year that Taylor Hall has had, not a lot of consistency, coming off of a torn ACL when speed is a huge factor in his game. He had been down, demoted on the Blackhawks fourth line. I mean, the Chicago Blackhawks fourth line. That's where Taylor Hall was playing. You think a contender is going to want to put him in their top six with his lack of consistency this year? He just really isn't all that attractive of a piece. A guy who was also, you know, you can debate whether this was right or wrong, but he was healthy scratched by the Blackhawks earlier on in the season. Never really lived up to the expectations of solidifying a top-line spot with Connor Bedard like he was expected to when the Hawks acquired him and Nick Foligno from the Boston Bruins. So, yeah, even if they did retain half of that salary, $6 million, they get it down to $3 million, you're probably at best looking at a late third-round selection in exchange for Taylor Hall, because you're probably going to be trading with a Stanley Cup contender. They're obviously going to finish higher in the standings. That's going to make that a late third round selection. Well, for the Blackhawks, they elected not to retain anything on Taylor Hall. They'll retain half on the more valuable contract, Mikko Rantanen. They're now retaining $4.625 million instead of $3 million. So they elected to retain an extra $1.625 million to move from a late third round pick to get their own third-round selection back from Carolina, which they traded to them at the 2024 NHL Draft to move up and select Jack Pridham, who's been a prospect I'm super high on and talked really well about in my recent midseason prospect rankings. So for the Blackhawks to get their own pick back, we know they're going to be one of the worst teams in hockey when it's all said and done this year. It's probably going to be the first, second, or third pick in the third round. And the Blackhawks have a ton of money to spend. They're not going to be up against the salary cap limit by the end of this year, so they could easily take on that extra $1.625 million to get a little bit better of a return for Taylor Hall. Not sexy, but a savvy piece of business by general manager Kyle Davidson. And now I'm sure some Blackhawks fans out there were wondering, well, why didn't they retain money on half of those guys, or on both of those guys, to get a better asset? Well, because the Blackhawks are still retaining money on Jake McCabe's contract this year as well. That would fill up all of their salary retention spots and would put them in a little bit of a pickle at this year's trade deadline and would kind of back them into a corner. And Kyle Davidson does not want to do that. He wants to be able to weaponize his cap space and have that last salary retention spot a little bit freed up. So that's kind of the breakdown, in my opinion, of this deal by the Chicago Blackhawks. Again, it's not one that's going to catch the headlines. It's not going to be super attractive, and it is disappointing to see two star-level players be on the move, and the Blackhawks only wind up getting their own pick back. I get that's the frustration, but had Martin Necas and Mikko Rantanen not been involved in this trade, and it was just the Chicago Blackhawks getting a early third-round pick for Taylor Hall, you would look at that as a good piece of business. One thing I will say, though, Blackhawks fans, the real straw that broke the camel's back in this deal, though, was Niels Juntorp being a throw-in to the Colorado Avalanche. I absolutely have no idea why Niels Juntorp was thrown into this deal. Former sixth-round pick from the Blackhawks in the 2022 NHL Draft. Shout out to my good buddy Big Will, who was the Juntorp insider at for the Dubuque Fighting Saints in the USHL as he lived out in that area. I saw Niels Juntorp get thrown in this deal. I'm like, no! How could they do that to my poor boy Niels, who is not going to be an NHL prospect if I'm speaking honestly here, but so random that he gets tossed into this deal. And I don't even know how that came about, because it's not like he was going to sign his entry-level contract here in Chicago. He was going to go against one of those 50 roster spots. I have no idea how Niels Juntorp got wind up into this thing, but Colorado might have actually landed the best Euro in this deal by getting Niels Juntorp. Thought that was a funny little tidbit. But yeah, in seriousness, again, the Blackhawks, maybe they should have gotten a second-round pick. That's kind of where my mind was at immediately on Friday night. And the reason I thought that was because when you're helping the Carolina Hurricanes get a star-level player like Mikko Rantanen, even if he's not signing an extension with the Carolina Hurricanes, that's a big-name piece you're helping add to their roster to, help them get over that hump in the Stanley Cup playoffs. That, to me, should have been worth a late second-round pick, but again, we're probably talking about a 4 to 5 pick difference here. So kind of splitting hairs in terms of my frustration, but make sure to go and let me know your reaction to the Blackhawks trade of Taylor Hall down in the comment section below. Do you feel like I do? Do you feel like it was a good piece of business, or do you feel like this was a miss by general manager Kyle Davidson? I probably understood that perspective a little bit better on Friday night when this trade was going down, but still curious to hear all of your thoughts down below in the comment section. There are my 2 cents on the Blackhawks trading Taylor Hall to the Carolina Hurricanes on Friday night. Coming up in just a moment, I'll talk about the kids continuing to cook despite a pair of frustrating losses from the Blackhawks over the weekend. But first, I do got to talk to you all about the fine folks over at FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is right around the corner. The Kansas City Chiefs taking on the Philadelphia Eagles. 1 game, 2 teams, and endless possibilities. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, naming the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it so easy to get in on the action. They now have live betting all game long so that you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff up until the final whistle. And the live betting feature also lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place just a $5 bet and potentially win $200 worth of bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's the icing on the cake. So make sure to go and download the FanDuel app or head on over to FanDuel.com right now to get started today. And you can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll net $200 worth of bonus bets for Super Bowl 59. Again, go and check out FanDuel.com to take advantage of this amazing offer and to bet with FanDuel, the official partner of Super Bowl 59. Segment 2, we're now officially in the second half of the 2024-2025 NHL regular season, Blackhawks fans, and it's become pretty clear at this point that it's all about the kids the rest of the way here in Chicago. Yes, we did get another pair of frustrating losses from the Blackhawks over the weekend. On Friday night, they fell 4-3 in overtime to the Tampa Bay Lightning. They also fell 4-2 to the Minnesota Wild yesterday, a game that I really don't know how many Blackhawks fans were tuning in. You had the Kansas City Chiefs and the Buffalo Bills, maybe the biggest non-Super Bowl football game I think I can remember in the last 5 to 6 years. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but with the Blackhawks taking on the Wild at 6 p.m. Central Time, I was like, oh boy, I don't know how many people are going to be tuning into this one, and it looked like the Blackhawks weren't even tuned into that one for the opening 40 minutes. They fell behind 3-0, did claw their way back to make things a little bit interesting, but ultimately fell 4-2 to the Minnesota Wild on Sunday. Yeah, it was another pair of losses for the Hawks. They've now dropped 8 of 11 games here in January, but at the very least, Blackhawks fans, the kids continue to make an impact, and Friday night was a full-blown kids display at the United Center. Awesome to see. Colton Dach finally gets his first NHL goal in a very power forward mold type of way. It was a little bit Tyler Bertuzzi-esque, and I think those are the areas where we're going to see Colton Dach thrive offensively, in the crease, in the dirty areas, right out in front of the net, being the screener, maybe on the man advantage from time to time. That's where Colton Dach's offensive success, most of it in my belief, is going to come from. Overdue, though, for Colton Dach to get his first NHL tuck. I've been liking what I've seen from the kid for the most part in a bottom six type of role. I don't ever think he's going to have true top six level upside, but I do think he is capable enough to be a capable producer in the bottom six, to be a puzzle piece for the Blackhawks one day down the road. But nice to see him finally convert for his first NHL goal, following up on a loose puck right out in front. Then we saw Connor Bedard set up Frank Nazar for an absolute howitzer of a wrist shot top shelf for his second goal of the season. And then how about Big Lou Crevier, Blackhawks fans? The kid continues to win me over. I've probably had some tough comments on Louis Crevier that, knowing what we do now, a month ago would probably look pretty foolish. Man, I think I just got to admit I was wrong about Louis Crevier. I never saw this type of upside, and I always admitted, for a 7th round pick, his development has been wondrous. And for being a big guy, 6'7", like, he skates not Alex Vlasic well, but he moves around pretty well for a guy of his size. I never saw him piecing it together like he has over these last few weeks and really established a nice second pairing along with Alex Vlasic. I know the Blackhawks defense as a whole under Anders Sorensen hasn't been as strong as it was under Luke Richardson, but I've been pretty thrilled with what I've seen out of Louis Crevier, and for him to net his 3rd goal of the season already in that game on Friday night against the Lightning. And the way that he did it too, jumping up into the play, recognizing where the open ice is in the offensive zone, and then firing a wrister home. Excellent to see out of Louis Crevier. Frank Nazar with the primary assist as well, giving him and Crevier their second points of the game. First multi-point NHL game for both of those two guys. Lucas Reichel also picked up a secondary assist on that goal as well. Unfortunately, the Blackhawks would go and spoil all the fun by allowing a goal in both the final minute of the second period and the third period. Also spoiled Arvid Soderblom's tremendous performance in that. This kid, continues to show he's one of the best and most promising young goaltenders in the NHL. A statement no Blackhawks fan thought I would be saying on this show, probably even 6 months removed from now. Soderblom has been incredible. Stopped 36 of the 40 shots that he faced on Friday night against the Lightning. Many of them were high-quality saves in that third period to just give the Blackhawks a chance going into the 3-on-3 period. Unfortunately, the Hawks weren't able to get the job done, but an incredible performance out of the kids, despite the team coming away with yet another loss. Sunday, I mentioned a pretty sleepy performance from the Blackhawks. Looked like they were actually tuned into the Bills-Chiefs game for the opening 40 minutes, dug themselves a 3-0 deficit, but did get to see some life from the Blackhawks in the final frame, which was better than nothing, I guess. Seth Jones with a power play goal. Connor Bedard with the primary assist to now give him 17 points over his last 16 games. And then Frank the Tank Nazar, baby, stays red hot. Follows up on a nice drive by Ethan Del Mastro, who, as I mentioned on Friday's episode, was recalled from the Rockford IceHogs for the first time this season. Nice aggressive play by Del Mastro in the offensive zone to drive that puck to the net. Takes a little bit of a crazy bounce. Frank Nazar is Johnny on the spot for his third goal of the season, second goal in as many games, now giving him points in 4 games in a row. Frank Nazar has found his groove, baby. And this is why I call him Frank the Tank. Not only because of what he can do offensively, but how he goes about his business out there. Frank Nazar is a dog, fellas. He is a dog. He's not afraid to go to the dirty areas. He's going to forecheck like a bat out of hell, creates plays even when it looks like the opposing team is going to be carrying the puck up the ice. And his speed has been absolutely excellent on both sides of the ice. I'm ecstatic with what I'm seeing from Frank Nazar. And if you had been watching the Blackhawks the last couple of weeks up to this point, you knew that Frank Nazar was on the precipice of something special. Heck of a weekend for Frank Nazar to continue his point streak. Ethan Del Mastro with his first NHL point on the primary assist as well. He did have a couple of shoddy defensive sequences in that game on Sunday against Minnesota, but quite honestly, who didn't from the Blackhawks in those opening 2 periods? But altogether, I like Del Mastro's confidence and aggressiveness with the puck. I do think he's got to be a little bit more choosy and selective, and there's a time and a place for those types of moves. But those are decisions and things you learn with more experience. I like that at least Ethan Del Mastro has the confidence and the poise and the belief in himself that he can make those types of plays. If he makes mistakes, again, those are things that we can live with those, with where the Blackhawks are at right here, right now in this season. We can live with mistakes from young players, but it absolutely should all be about what the kids do the rest of the way and giving them opportunities. And Ethan Del Mastro, I don't think should come out of the lineup for maybe a couple of shoddy defensive plays on Sunday against Minnesota. When he made a nice play like this, I think it'll help his confidence if you just keep him in the lineup and let him continue to trust himself and learn from his mistakes on the fly. I truly think that's how the Blackhawks should be going about things the rest of the way. But nice to see the kids, even though the Blackhawks came up with another couple of losses. They've now dropped 7 of their past 8 games. Nice to see the kids at least making an impact. And speaking of the kids, there's more of them on the way. Is Sunday afternoon, Landon Slaggert was officially recalled from the Rockford IceHogs for the first time this season. Did not get in the game against Minnesota, but would probably expect him to go when the Blackhawks are back in action tomorrow against the Tampa Bay Lightning down in Tampa. Slags, we saw him last year after wrapping up his senior year with Notre Dame, where he was the captain of the Fighting Irish, tallied 4 points, scored his first NHL goal, and added 3 assists in 16 games with the Blackhawks. Wasn't able to crack the team's opening night roster. That was always going to be a long shot for him in his first pro season, but has been really solid with the Rockford IceHogs. 25 points, 10 goals, and 15 assists through his opening 39 AHL games. Was also someone I broke down recently in my Chicago Blackhawks midseason prospect rankings. Had a feeling he was probably going to get a call up at some point. I honestly thought it was going to be Cole Gutman over Landon Slaggert, considering he had been named an AHL All-Star. But I think with that being the case, they wanted to let Gutman remain in the AHL so he'll be able to actually go and play in that game. And then I'd assume down the stretch of the season, they'll probably give Gutman another chance. But in all honesty, they should be calling up Landon Slaggert over Cole Gutman. He's the younger of the 2 players by a couple of years, the player that this organization probably has higher hopes for. And I don't think Landon Slaggert quite has the upside that Colton Dach possesses, but they're both similar-ish type of players. Dach is definitely the bigger of the 2, as Slaggert's only 6 foot, about 190 pounds, but he plays a pretty strong game and is willing to go to the dirty areas, goes to the front of the net, and is just kind of an impact player. I was really impressed with what I saw from him in all facets of the game during his 16 NHL contests he got with the Blackhawks last year. A guy who can make plays in all three zones, defensively in the neutral zone, and can do good things as well in the dirty areas offensively. Not much of a playmaker, but I think it was a good reward for Landon Slaggert for getting off to a good start to his pro campaign, getting him a call up here for the Blackhawks. Again, as I mentioned, should be in the lineup, I think, when the Hawks return to play tomorrow in Tampa against the Lightning. Slaggert, only 22 years old. Getting him another look, I think, is the right decision. We'll see if it winds up coming tomorrow against the Bolts, but there are my thoughts on the full-blown kids movement that's clearly going on with the Blackhawks in the second half of the regular season, as it should be, in my opinion. Coming up in just a moment before I close out today's episode, Blackhawks fans, still got to get into my weekly Mailbag Monday fan segment. Back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Just wanted to say thank you to everyone for making Locked On Blackhawks your very first listen, here to start off your day. For your second listen, make sure to go and check out the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast so that you could become a fantasy hockey expert and get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from Steal and Flip. And you can easily find the link to Locked On Fantasy Hockey right now on YouTube or wherever you may be listening to your podcasts. Segment 3, Mailbag Monday. Before I close out today's episode, only got a couple of questions to go through for today's edition, so please make sure to reach out with your Blackhawks-related questions. If you're watching this right now on YouTube, drop one down below in the comment section. If you're tuning in through an audio platform, you can easily leave your question in the review section. If you're on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, preferably along with a 5-star rating. Those always put a big smile on my face. Or you can also email lockedonblackhawks@gmail.com or DM me on any one of my social media platforms. First question I have today comes from PHHDVM on YouTube, who asked, for the mailbag, would it be disastrous to simply buy out TJ Brodie? What would be the downside? To send Kaiser down while Brodie gets ice time makes no sense to me. I'm in the same boat as that, and quite honestly, a TJ Brodie buyout would not be detrimental to the Chicago Blackhawks. It would, though, put him on their books for an extra year. We know he signed a 2-year contract at $3.75 million with no buyout. He comes off the Blackhawks books at the end of the 2025-2026 campaign. Should they elect to buy out TJ Brodie, whether that comes in the next couple of weeks during the summer, regardless, it would put him on their books for an extra year. He would be on there through the 2026-2027 season and would run the Hawks an extra $258K in 2026-2027. However, it would free them up $517,000 for the 2025-2026 campaign. Although I don't really think that's something Kyle Davidson is going to be holding too much value on, considering, yeah, I would like to see the Blackhawks make some big-name moves and add some big-name players, even if it's just 1 or 2 in the summer. You got to help this team take the next step. I don't think they're going to be right up against the salary cap by the end of next year. So that extra $517,000, I don't really think holds much weight in Kyle Davidson's opinion, and I don't think would be enough to have TJ Brodie on their books for an extra year using a salary retention spot. That's just my opinion. In terms of the financials of it. In terms of the structure of the Blackhawks blue line, clearly TJ Brodie is taking up an extra spot, and they need to solve this issue. I don't think a buyout is going to be coming during the midway point. If it hasn't happened yet, Blackhawks fans, I don't think it's going to be happening the rest of the way. Even though it clearly is a problem, we have one too many defensemen. Connor Murphy is on the precipice of a return as well. Is that going to send Ethan Del Mastro down to Rockford? Does that mean he and Wyatt Kaiser are going to be there for the remainder of the season? Because Alec Martinez spoke with the media a couple of weeks ago. Not exactly sure he's going to want to be moved at the trade deadline, which doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. I don't know. Ultimately, it just doesn't seem like the Blackhawks are going to be buying out TJ Brodie before the end of this year. Also, because that would take up their last salary retention spot, it would put Kyle Davidson in a little bit of a pickle at this year's trade deadline. So I don't think a TJ Brodie buyout is coming this year. I do think it's going to come during the summer, though, just because he's taking up a spot that they need to be using for a young defenseman. That's as simple as it is. TJ Brodie has not been good enough to be taking a lineup spot over a young defenseman. It's actually criminal that it's happening right here, right now. The Blackhawks are just kind of limited in terms of their solutions. What I think they should do with TJ Brodie is just send him to Rockford. No one's going to claim him through waivers. No one's going to pay him that money. I know it's the wrong message to send to a veteran defenseman who is willing to sign on with a team who's in the midst of a rebuild, but I'm sorry, TJ Brodie, your play just hasn't been good enough for me to put your feelings over the team's best interest and the team's best needs. I'm sorry, that's just the nature of the beast. And by the way, you're still getting paid nearly $4 million this year. And I'm never a guy who's like, oh, he's being paid a bunch of money, I should not feel bad for him. But ultimately, that's what it kind of is in this type of situation. If it was me, I would put TJ Brodie on waivers for the purpose of sending him to Rockford. And then in the summer, I would absolutely buy him out. I don't anticipate the Blackhawks are actually going to go through with that first half of the plan that I would like to see, but I do think they're going to buy him out in the summer. And it does make sense because, yeah, it is going to be a salary retention spot, but it's going to be after this year. McCabe's going to be off the books. Mikko Rantanen's going to be off the books. They're not that worried about that salary retention spot down the road. So that's kind of the plan I would expect with TJ Brodie. I think they're just going to live with him the rest of the year, as much as that sucks and as much as I disagree with it, but I would expect a buyout coming in the summer. Andrew K. emailed in the podcast and asked, Jack, what grade do you give GM KD so far? I get that he took over a disaster, but this year has been so much worse than what I hoped, and I can't help but wonder if he's part of the problem and not the solution. Let me know your thoughts on this. Thanks. I do think the criticism directed towards Kyle Davidson this year is fair. Criticism thrown his way the prior 2 years, I think, was really unfair considering where the Blackhawks were at, the path, the roster, the plan. You really couldn't get an accurate depiction of Kyle Davidson as a general manager up until this year. The Tyler Bertuzzi deal looks okay, probably 1 year too long, and that's probably the best free agent deal he gave out. The Teuvo Teravainen deal does not look very good. He hasn't been consistent whatsoever. He's here for another 2 years after this one. The Brodie deal looks terrible. The Martinez deal looks terrible. We haven't seen Laurent Brossoit. Kyle Davidson definitely deserves some criticism. But again, all of the key pieces of this rebuild, basically all of them are still either at the AHL level or playing junior or college hockey. So it's like, how can we really critique Kyle Davidson too much at this point in time when the key pieces he made of this rebuild, they're not even here yet? So I think we do got to bite our tongue a little bit on Kyle Davidson, but this year as a whole definitely is underwhelming and has not gone as well as I think any of us Blackhawks fans have hoped. I'd give Kyle Davidson a flat C for his job as general manager this season. Last question that I have here today comes from Semi-Pro Lou 9909, who asked, everybody wants a superstar, but only a few teams actually have them. Outside of Bedard, I don't see a superstar here, Jack. Who's the next one we get in Chicago? Very good question. And I think a very good point, Lou. Outside of Connor Bedard, I don't know if the Blackhawks have another superstar in their prospect pool. Maybe they do. Maybe they don't. I think the ones who could be superstars are, I don't know if Frank Nazar is going to be a superstar, but I think he's going to be a damn good player. Sam Rinzel maybe has that type of upside. I don't think Sasha Boisvert is going to be a superstar. Like, I think all these guys can be darn good players, but in terms of superstars, I think Connor Bedard is really the only one as of right now who I see being an absolute superstar, and that's why I would have liked to see the Blackhawks draft Ivan Demidov with the second overall pick, because I thought he had superstar level upside. And like you said, Lou, like, they don't grow on trees. Everyone wants them. Only a few teams have them. That's why I think the Hawks, even though it might be a little bit too early in the rebuild, they got to make a run for Mikko Rantanen or Mitch Marner this year, because superstars don't grow on trees, and you actually have an opportunity to go and get one. And yes, I know they'll have an opportunity to get one in the draft. Drafts are still gambles. Free agency, yeah, it's a gamble in terms of the financials. The Blackhawks can afford some financials. They have to take a swing on a big name type of player to really change the ties and get them over the hump. And while hockey is a team game, more so than any of the other professional sports, I believe, you still need that big superstar. And Connor Bedard at 19 years old just cannot do it himself. And even with his lack of size down the road, I have some concerns about whether or not he can do it himself. So I completely agree, Lou. I think Mitch Marner and Mikko Rantanen are the two this summer the Blackhawks absolutely have to go after. If not them, then someone in the trade market, maybe an Elias Pettersson or someone like that. But I completely agree with this point. That's the next thing the Chicago Blackhawks need to address is a big name player, particularly a forward, to help along with Connor Bedard. All right, that's going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks. As always, thank you all again for joining me on the show. Be sure to go and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube right now to help me reach the 2,000 subscriber threshold, and also go and follow Locked On Blackhawks for free wherever you may be listening to your podcast, so that way you don't miss out on all of the latest Blackhawks news and updates. Until the next episode, everyone, enjoy the rest of your Mondays. I'll see you next time on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.